Well, we're going to talk a little more about this conclave and what's next for the Catholic Church with our guest, Marc Loustau, who's a cultural anthropologist and an expert on religions and politics in Eastern European countries. Thank you very much for speaking to us on France 24.
Thank you.
How can we just heard a little bit from our correspondent there, Seema Gupta, but how can we imagine that this first vote really played out behind closed doors? Of course, we don't really know, but as we mentioned, these cardinals, a lot of them are meeting each other for the first time. There might be some language barriers.
The first ballot last night, and perhaps even into today, the first ballots are really a way for cardinals to go on the record with their colleagues. They've spent days previously in private and behind the scenes meetings and discussions, perhaps small group conversations. But the fact is, many, as you've said, many of these cardinals don't know each other. And this is especially true for the newer cardinals, whom Francis selected in his last years as Pope. They live in places like Australia, Papua New Guinea, and Mongolia, and many have rarely visited Rome to meet and learn from each other, to hear each other's opinions about what they want for future leadership in the Church. So today, they'll really begin the process of whittling down the field to a few leading candidates.
And what about the kinds of backroom conversations that they might have had with each other previously, at least the ones who are geographically a bit closer? And will cardinals have an opportunity to speak to each other at lunchtime?
Well, certainly there are a lot of informal conversations that happen during the conclave. And in fact, some of those conversations are probably more important than the formal speeches that are given and the votes that are taken. But as much of the coverage of the previous days of meetings has really kind of divided along the lines or interpreted these conversations in terms of reformist versus conservative differences in the Church, or fault lines, or even camps, warring camps in the Church. And that's really the wrong way to talk about the next Pope and the direction that these deliberations will take. Like other global leaders, the new head of the Church will need, I think, a steady diplomatic hand to navigate what really is a changing global order, with new powers on the scene like China, but then also resurgent right-wing movements and imperialistic powers like Russia. It's going to be a very complicated time looking ahead for the Church, and I think the cardinals are probably taking that into account.
You mentioned conservative versus reformist there. What do you make of what's seen as one of the main candidates that we're talking about, the Hungarian Peter Eldred? What do you make of his links to his country's far-right government?
Certainly. So I'm based here in Hungary, and a lot of the talk about Cardinal Eldred up to this point has kind of portrayed him as something of a compromise candidate. Conservative, yes, but perhaps with a gentler tone. However, in Hungary, he really has a very different reputation. He's known as a very severe, serious, even imperious leader, and certainly not open to dialogue. He has shown a callous disregard, in particular for victims of sexual abuse in the Church, as well as homeless in his home city of Budapest. Under his watch, the Church here in Budapest actually took to court an abuse victim who was simply trying to raise awareness about the need for justice. So is Eldred really open to dialogue in the Church, as some would say? My opinion is not.
And let's talk about some of the other so-called favorites. Obviously, this is pure speculation with there being so much secrecy, but questions are starting to come about. Will we have our first Asian Pope, with one contender coming from the Philippines, perhaps one from Ghana or the Democratic Republic of Congo? Is there anything else that stands out to you among these contenders?
Well, some say that the current period that we're living through and that the Church is facing is a little bit like the early 1960s, when Catholics around the world were facing the challenge of modernizing and reforming the Church. But to my mind, historically, this age is more like the 1930s, when the world was facing the rise of violent right-wing extremism. And someone with diplomatic experience, like Cardinal Pizzaballa of Jerusalem, or Pietro Parolin, the Vatican's Secretary of State, really the foreign minister of the Vatican, could work with world leaders while also directing the Church in a moral direction to suffering and be present to those who are really suffering the most in these global conflicts. But then there's also the fact, and this really cannot be ignored, that the church is growing the fastest in places like Africa and Asia, and certainly cardinals like Cardinal Tagle of the Philippines would be a wise and I think stirring choice to direct the church in a more global direction, or really to acknowledge the global reality of the church as it currently stands.
And mentioning global conflicts there, do you think that the next Pope will be perhaps under pressure, or at least compared to Pope Francis and his role perhaps in conflicts like the war in Gaza and his stance, his open stance that he took on that?
It's certainly true that Pope Francis tried to bring a moral voice to global debates around conflicts in Gaza, but also especially in Ukraine, where he was very active and tried his best really to engage with the Russian Orthodox Church in bringing peace to, or at least brokering a peace and bringing the two sides closer together after Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine in 2022. But the fact is that Pope Francis really did not succeed. He had high hopes that he could really use his moral charisma to bring people to the table and to show people, world leaders especially, the moral way forward. But he really did not succeed, and the two sides, and especially the Russian Orthodox Church, which has played a very strong role in backing Putin in this conflict, the Russian Orthodox Church is no closer to seeking peace in Ukraine, and that was really, I think, a disappointment for Pope Francis, certainly, but also especially for the people who are suffering the most, which is to say Ukrainians, everyday Ukrainians, including the Catholic Church in Ukraine. Many people have, go ahead.
Sorry, I just before we run out of time, there was another question I wanted to ask about the challenges faced sort of within the Catholic Church. It might be difficult to say at this stage before we have a name, but how might the next pontiff tackle those challenges, such as the role of women in the church, still fallout from the clerical child abuse scandal and the Vatican's balance sheets as well?
Well, certainly Pope Francis showed the way. He himself, I think one of his most admirable characteristics was his willingness to listen and then to change his mind, to change his heart. And that, I think, would be an admirable characteristic in the next Pope as well. Many people have asked over the last few days who liberals want, who conservatives want to be the next successor to St. Peter. I think the better question is, what kind of leader does the church need in this time, in this place? This may get us a little bit closer to understanding the logic behind the choice of the next Pope, whoever that is. In the end, Pope Francis wanted the church to be blown by the Holy Spirit, to be subject to the often unpredictable direction of the Holy Spirit. And he left the world really one last gift, a conclave that really could go in many different directions. And really, we'll just have to wait and see.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Marc Loustau, a cultural anthropologist, for your analysis on that.